Sometimes you don't have the option to choose between a pension and a lump sum. The pension is really the only option that's presented, but you do have a choice in terms of what type of pension for the survivor. So if you're single, that's not much of a decision. You generally will take the single life or highest amount. And so if you pass away, there's no amount that's provided to a survivor. But if you're single and you don't have any dependent that is relying upon you, then that's fine. But as a couple, if you're looking at the decision making for couples, I generally will assume that if a couple can survive in their plan on the amount of the 100% joint-in survivor, that it could potentially be the best option. But if you want to look at more sophisticated decision making, what you want to do is you want to compare the income and expenses while they're living as a couple, both living, with the income and expenses for the surviving spouse, assuming that there's just a surviving spouse situation. And what you're looking at is comparing the income reductions for the surviving spouse related to their Social Security and the reduction in their pension. If there's a reduction in their pension, you're comparing that total amount per month with the potential expense reductions that there will be by just having one spouse rather than two spouses. And I think a 15% reduction is a good rule of thumb to use. Not everything goes away. There are some expenses that are consistent regardless of who's living, and then there are some expenses that are reduced due to there being one person. Let's look at a detail and more example. On the left-hand side, you have the during life, both spouses living circumstance. Let's say that they have $5,000 a month of after-tax income and $4,500 a month of expenses. In other words, they have $500 a month of cash flow margin to the positive. Now, the $5,000 a month of their income comes from 2 Social Security checks, the 50% joint survivor pension they elect, and $750 of investment income. Now, they could choose $675 for the survivor pension, joint survivor pension, where during life they get $675, and then if one spouse passes away, they just continue to get the full $675. Let's compare that on the right-hand side to income versus expenses if there's just one spouse left. Well, in that case, after-tax income has been cut down to $3,125, and that's because we've lost one Social Security check of $1,500, and half of the pension has gone away. And we'll say that expenses are now 15% less, previously $4,500, now $3,825. But now they're in a $700 a month cash flow deficit versus being a $500 per month cash flow margin, because ultimately what happened is they had a $675 per month reduction in their expenses, but they had a $1,875 reduction in their income. And so it swung them from being positive per month to being negative per month. So comparing those two, now it's not that them choosing the $675 joint 100% joint survivor pension would have solved the change between one versus the other, but it does show that the $675 would have been the wiser choice, because although they would have had less each month in cash flow margin, they would ultimately have had much less of a cash flow deficit in this particular situation.